2, 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to let's say Delusions of Grandeur. I'm your host, David Streggy, and here in the room with me, I have the rest of the Delusions of Grandeur crew with me, and we are going to be discussing more with the Kaiju Combat Month, where the first film we are going to be discussing is a government secret. So, Dane, why don't you tell us what kind of secret we are going to be talking about and what we have in store for tonight?
Yes, well, everyone can hear me okay, right?
Yep.
Perfect. Well, tonight we have a rather unique entry. This was my pick for the Kaiju Combat Month, and it is Matt Reeves' 2008 sci-fi / kaiju found footage film Cloverfield, and the Imdb synopsis is as follows. A group of friends venture deep into the streets of New York on a rescue mission during a rampaging monster attack. Oh boy. That sounded like we had a monster attack just then.
Sounded a lot like...
Yeah, it sounded like some kind of cry of a monster, but...
I sneezed.
Exactly. He just proved my point. But that is the basic plot. I mean, it's something that it's not overly complicated in its construction. Not that any kaiju film necessarily, by definition, is that complicated. I think if it were to be that much more complicated, it would be kind of defeating the purpose of the genre. But anyway, so this film came out in 2008, early 2008. Well, I think it was like January or something.
January.
And I remembered when this came out, I remembered everyone in my age group was talking about it for whatever reason. And
I remember that people were talking about it for sure.
Yeah, it really had a buzz about it, and it was. Now keep in mind that the concept of viral marketing was still relatively new, and you had some predecessors to it, like with obviously the movie that launched found footage as we know it. I mean, well, you had Cannibal Holocaust, but that was kind of its own thing. Like, it's not 100% found footage, but the film that launched found footage proper was Blair Witch, the Blair Witch Project, and that launched viral marketing way before the studios ever started to do it. But I remember Cloverfield was one of the earlier examples of viral marketing that was very effective. And everyone was talking about it. This was before the wide release of the nationwide release of Paranormal Activity, even though it had its festival run in 2007. So it came out in the festival circuit the year before, but another Paramount film. So Paramount was kind of on the forefront of this thing.
Yeah,
and this was a found footage film and a kaiju film with an original monster that the marketing name for it is Clover, and people don't even really know what the Cloverfield means other than it being like a code name basically for this whole event. It kind of was a big deal when it came out, bottom line. So what were everyone's first impressions? Whoever would like to start.
I guess I'll go first, and then I'll see what everybody else thinks. I went and saw this with a friend, or I forget exactly which friend now, but I went and saw it in the theater with like 2 other friends. And we came out of it thinking, where the fuck was the monster? Like halfway through the film. So I mean, you get a lot of the story line, and then it's like, okay, where is it?
Yeah.
You know, and then finally you start to see it through glimpses of video. Video that's. I mean, you get to see it from a distance, and you're like, you're not sure exactly what the hell it is, and then it's like you get to see it through glimpses through the video that it was in the video store, and then finally it's like glimpses of the monster through various camera angles and stuff. So to me, I was very confused throughout my first watching of the film. And what I did see of the monster, at least while it was in the theater, I was like, okay, well, what was it? Where did it come from? You know, I mean, I get that it was a found footage film, so I didn't get exactly what it really looked like until my second watching when it finally came out on video. You know, and I guess it kind of grew on me there when it came home to me.
Well, and that was, I think, a very common reaction at the time, you know, and this is a film, I think, that kind of got built on that word of mouth and the viral marketing, and when it came out on DVD and Blu-ray, I think people kind of delved into it more. So yeah, I think that's a common reaction. What about you, Forrest?
I was disappointed the first time.
I don't know. Okay, so I'm wondering now because I actually missed this movie in theaters when it came out. I actually just watched it. The first time I actually saw it for the very first time this weekend. Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say that I saw it for the first time. I am embarrassed to say that I just saw it for the first time this weekend, and also I watched it again the other day. But I really enjoyed it. Lots of good, the special, for a moderately budgeted movie, it's really well done. Excellent, a lot of good names, a lot of talent, a lot of good, the characters like you care about. I actually found myself, caring about them, hoping that they made it out alive.
And then, what about you, Brandon?
Well, this is definitely not my first watch of it. I had first saw this, I think, a while back on DVD when I got it from Movie Stop, which was, it was, I mean, like I say, I missed Movie Stop.
Yeah.
And
may they rest in peace.
So I had actually, unlike Dave, I'd actually heard a little bit about this beforehand, and people were telling me this is a different movie because you don't get to see the monster that's coming after them for the most part, and that builds a suspense. So I was prepared for it when it hit, and I had thought this is a very unique found footage monster film. I think this is the first, at least the first that I've seen as far as kaiju found footage films. And I was quite impressed with the actual movie itself. I thought that they did a great job in handling it. Now, do I think that, I think the concept is good for a one-off. I don't think that I would ever care for it a second time.
Yeah.
But I do think that as something that's kind of unique, and anytime that a movie tries to do something original, and there's such a lack of originality in movies these days, I really try to focus on that and how cool that is. So I was very impressed with it. I thought it was quite good as far as kaiju movies go, and as far as found footage. If you want, like, I don't know, Kim, are you able to give your first run through or
of what?
Of Cloverfield when you first saw it?
Did I see the theater? I can't remember how. I don't know if I saw it in the theater. I feel like I did, but I just can't remember. Yeah, I was definitely expecting more than what, the movie ended up being. But I actually liked it, so I don't know why people complain about it so much.
Well, I've learned that whenever it comes to found footage and anything that has J.J. Abrams' name on it in any form, whether he's a producer, director, showrunner of a show, whatever it is, basically those two things, you got a perfect storm of complainers because for whatever reason people can't help but complain about found footage and about J.J. Abrams. And then what about you, Jake?
Well, actually, I can definitely speak to a degree the Abrams thing because he has his ardent fans, and then the people are like, "Oh man, him again." Uh, and generally, I'm somewhere in between. I'm usually intrigued by his name being attached, but I don't consider it the second coming of anything or what have you. But with this one, Forrest, you don't have to be ashamed that you are not the only one. I had never seen Cloverfield before this week. Uh, I knew of it, and I was
Yeah.
very familiar
Yeah.
with the marketing campaign. I heard a lot about it. I heard what the critics thought. I heard what audiences thought. And I was always intrigued by the response. But on the found footage thing, that is a whole genre that I know Brandon and Kim are all about that. But I am hit or miss on found footage. To me,
Same here. Same
I
here.
don't, yeah, it rarely screams to me, oh, I got to check this out. I mean, I missed the whole Blair Witch thing when it happened. And if we ever cover that on here, I'll go into more detail. But that was one that I saw as a bystander, saw the effect of it. I did see Paranormal Activity in theaters and had a very strong positive reaction to it. But a lot of the found footage, I'm like, eh. And it's definitely something I rarely want to go to theaters for. But now I'm thinking this is one I would have liked to have seen in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
But because I really, really, really like the whole. I know, Dave, there's not a lot of answers in this movie, but that's part of the point. I like the whole you're basically seeing what these people, you know what they know, you see what
Yeah.
they see. And it's kind of, it adds to the suspense, it adds to the whole what in the flippin' hell is going on aspect of the movie because you seriously don't know. You're following along with a bunch of college age people who have been partying all night. They don't have a clue. And I also thought it was interesting giving a sort of I guess you could say a mechanism for making sure the movie exists at all,
Mm-hmm.
having the actual cameraman be someone who's not that bright, who's extremely loyal to his friends. He was told film everything, so he's doing his damnedest to film everything. And I don't think that concept would have worked with one of the other characters. So I like that aspect. Even though he is a character annoyed and mostly disinterested in me, as a means to an end, he was a very effective way of doing that. And
Mm-hmm.
the same thing with him stalking Lizzie Kaplan's character. I felt bad for her, but on the other hand, it kept her in the movie.
Yeah. Well,
So-
it's
Cute
I mean
moment later on,
in
Yeah.
that setting, it's one of those things where if you did
Right.
have a camera, you probably would want to document it for the sake of
Right.
posterity. I mean, that's what happened with something as comparatively short-lived in terms of actual duration of the event, but equally as earth-shattering was something like 9/11. Like you had a lot of,
Yeah.
well, you had a lot of actual people with handy cams and stuff on the ground. They were recording
Mhm.
everything as it happened. So, and that's a real life event, let alone something like
Yeah.
this where they get down and dirty with it and everything. But Mo.
Oh, dude, I definitely saw Cloverfield. I'm pretty sure once, like back when it was new. I'd wager I was decently drunk at the time. Like I think my very first impression of the movie was that is a shaky camera. But I eventually revisited it a few years later, and I liked it. I enjoyed it. I don't think I fully appreciated some of the stuff, like some of the parallels with 9/11 and things like that, until this viewing of it. It's definitely a movie that I fall a little bit more in love with every time I see it, you know. And in terms of its place in found footage stuff, I think it's kind of wild, like how Cloverfield comes the closest to making you feel like you're trapped in the camera.
Oh
Other
yeah.
found footage movies kind of have a different way of piecing it all together. This one really felt like you were just looking at a video that was on someone's camera, so that was neat.
Well, it puts you, to use the Latin, it puts you in medias res, so it like puts you right in the middle of the action, and you know, it's something that I agree with you. I think other found footage, see, I'm a big fan of it as a technique because I think if you do it right, it really forces you to be creative with how you tell a story, and you can tell stories in a totally new way. And the ones that I like, which I may or may not have sent my recommendation list for found footage, I may or may not have sent it to everyone, but the ones that I like, they tend to do that, and especially when they get that subjectivity factor in there. And in this case, you've definitely got that, and you've also got the fact that it's really just boots on the ground, or on the rooftops, or where, or in the subway, or wherever you are.
And this film was mainstream; it wasn't independent or anything.
Yeah.
It had a pretty good pedigree, pretty good backing.
Yeah.
You know, pretty good people in there. You know, I mean, no huge names, although again, Lizzie Kaplan's well known, and there's a couple others that are pretty well known. Yeah, well, this was his first movie. Am I remembering correctly? This is the Deadpool director, and of course he brought
Matt Reeves. He did this movie. He did Dawn of the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, right.
War for the Planet of the Apes, and then now he's doing the Batman with Robert Pattinson.
Right. Oh, he is the guy doing that. Interesting.
Yeah.
But I do want to make a comment on your idea. You're right that it forces creativity, because one of the issues I have with found footage as a whole is I feel like it's also an excuse for laziness with a lot of people. So the really good ones are creative.
Well, and that's generally why people don't like found footage, because they're so used to, like, you know, conventional movies, that they see it as lazy. And again, I would beg to differ, just mostly because of, well, the ones I'm thinking of. Now, I have seen ones that do more closely fit that, you know, lazy filmmaking definition, but generally speaking, those are the ones that tend not to ascend to quite that level of prominence. And you know, that's part of why I selected it for my choice, was because I think it does stand apart from other found footage films and other kaiju films, and it blends them together in an interesting way. Plus, in much the same way as M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, which also, you know, people either love or hate, or, you know, they pick apart or whatever. But, you know, and, you know, it's a similar situation of, you know, we don't know enough about the aliens, blah, blah, blah. But the whole point of that film and this one, we only know as much as the characters know. And in those situations, in that circumstance, you would know next to nothing. And so your mind is running wild with speculation as to what on earth this creature could be, and why it's there, and all that stuff. And again, I imagine that people on 9/11 who, you know, had no clue about any of that stuff, and the best that they had was, you know, maybe a radio or a TV or something. And even then, it's like nobody really, the general public didn't know anything.
Yeah, I mean, like, unless you saw the planes hit or you heard the news immediately, you might have thought that shit was a kaiju attack, you know?
Well, that, or, you know, the planes, like, you never know. It could have been just an accident, you know, like, you didn't know. You know, who knows? You know, the controls could have gone out, and all of a sudden, bam! You know, it goes right into the towers. You don't know until obviously after the fact. But
like in this one, isn't their first reaction that is an earthquake? Isn't that their first reaction?
Yeah, which I mean, that would be rather unusual for New York City. But then again, in North Carolina, where I am, we had whatever we had, like it was like a 5 point something earthquake, and I remembered feeling it. And I was like, wow, that's unusual. Because I was used to those in California, where earthquakes are relatively common. But yeah, that would be rather unusual. But well, it puts you. Let's keep in mind the context of this thing. So this was 2008, very early 2008, mind you, and so we were not too far removed from 9/11 as an event that was still fresh in people's memories. And, for a good number of years, there were not official, but sort of like, just good taste kind of steering away from, things with mass destruction and, buildings crashing and all that stuff for obvious reasons, because we weren't really ready for that at that point. And, I can understand why. But
especially
that's
in New
also
York.
most definitely, but that's also why, like, another Paramount film, when you looked at like War of the Worlds, the Steven Spielberg one, why Dakota Fanning there when they're driving away from the tripods that are attacking, she's like, is it the terrorists? Because again, that was very, very fresh in people's minds, and it's again set in New York, so I think that's an interesting point of comparison, but also I think Paramount's a studio in general. I've noticed that they seem to be more willing to take risks on certain kinds of things. And, sometimes it pays off, sometimes it doesn't. But, more often than not, I've found that they've tended to be more okay with putting their names on certain concepts or whatever that may not take off, but if they do, then they really do. And obviously, like, this took off in its own way. And then, of course, Paranormal Activity really took off the next year with a whole big franchise. And this film, it took off in a different way, where they were able to basically get two totally unrelated spec scripts and add some very tangential sci-fi connections and call it a franchise, which is funny.
Yeah.
But I think this film definitely adds some unique touches to the kaiju formula and to the found footage formula. And I also chose this one because, well, kaiju is obviously it's a Japanese word, it's a Japanese concept.
Yeah.
In the way that we know it, even though something like King Kong, which is American, that came before. So this is much more in the mold of, in terms of the actual monster design, it's much more in the American mold than it is the classical bipedal, somewhat humanized, somewhat anthropomorphized Japanese monster. And so I thought, again, that would kind of stand out. What did we all think?
No sock puppet this time.
No.
Godzilla film, the 98 Godzilla film, in a lot of ways, because you had like I think the mini monsters in that one too. I can't remember, but I think you did, yeah. And
Yeah.
Like I say, the monster kind of reminded me of that one.
Of Zilla.
Yeah, that Godzilla.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's a worthy point of comparison just because, like it or not, 1998 Godzilla was definitely uniquely American in its, the creature design, in its overall, I think, taking after Jurassic Park more than even Godzilla, and taking after something that was more akin to like an actual dinosaur rather than like a mythic creature. And again, you did have like those smaller creatures in that film. Well, in that film and in this, which honestly, I think that was my favorite aspect of this, was actually the small creatures. That
I don't know why I love it when like something giant sheds other living things. It's just terrifying.
It kind of made you feel doomed in a way. It reminded me also of there was a creature in a video game called Final Fantasy X. which was the name of the creature was called Sin, and basically the creature would go around and destroy everything in the world until somebody fought it, and you were able to keep the peace for a couple of years. But it would shed off all these little versions, well, little being,
relative term.
And so, but it's that profound feeling of doom, of hopelessness and helplessness that I think that it helped magnify with that creature.
Yeah.
It literally made you feel afraid and powerless in its wake.
Well, and it's also a little bit, it's only Lovecraftian in the sense that, you have something that's physically large, but then you have something that's a smaller offshoot of it in some way, and it indicates that there are things that are both bigger and smaller than we can necessarily comprehend, and things that are beyond our knowledge, and that unknown factor definitely works well in the film's favor, I think. In terms of actual plot, it's relatively straightforward in terms of just they're at the party, and then the Clover, I guess we'll call it, monster attacks, and they just have to survive and try to figure out what's going on. And obviously the military is not saying anything, and there's some speculation going around as to whether it was like a government created creature or if it was an alien or whatever it was. And I guess that the only option at that point is to nuke the city. And what else am I missing? I mean, it's a pretty simple plot.
I mean,
Well-
if you want to go deeper than that, you could also call Cloverfield like a cautionary tale about being way too involved in the love life of your friends. That's basically most of the movie. Is them trying to get to his girlfriend's house.
Yeah, you could say the love story was the major piece of it, about them kind of somewhat reflecting on it with his brother's marriage and what they wanted to do long term and how they could explore each other's relationship. But in my opinion, it
was pretty whack. Bro was thirsty. Okay, he climbed a friggin' toppled skyscraper.
I agree. I mean, it was just an excuse for him to get his friends killed, just so he can, sort of get his
scene where he kissed her.
Yeah,
ridiculous.
That was honestly I do like the film overall, and I think it's a very important one to study in both kaiju and found footage. But I will say that I don't particularly find the characters all that compelling. But then again, for most kaiju films, can you really say that? Even the good ones,
There's some rare exceptions, but no, not really.
I mean, that's not really what it's about usually.
They're definitely supposed to be kind of douchey New York kid, they're not really kids anymore, but they're like, those loft party for let's go, wax philosophical on the rooftop type of assholes that you see in shows about people like that.
Basically the Trump kids.
I liked that TJ Miller sounded half drunk for like 2/3 of the shit though, because they were getting drunk up there. He was toasted before it even kicked off. But
exactly,
the subplot aside, and however not rewarding that bullshit was, it's really cool the way that they intersperse like the video that they've recorded over throughout the movie. I thought that was a neat touch.
Yeah, apparently they're going through. Apparently, ex-love and him, the brother, is going to Coney Island, I believe it was, and that's throughout the movie.
Yeah, with his college roommate that he hooked up with once and gets all his friends killed so he can have like a kiss. I thought that was cool though, and they used it really good to drive home that bleak ending of this movie. It is probably the most depressing ending in kaiju history. So
hey,
there's
at least
that.
One of them, you think at least one of them manages to leave. I mean, to our knowledge, anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. It said that the tape was recovered in the area formerly known as Central Park, so I'm guessing that it was like one of those, the Game Boy that survived the RPG fire in Iraq type things. Like, somehow the Game Boy is still intact.
Well, I'm talking about the friend that got on the helicopter before them and left.
If we're honest, probably the only character that truly deserved to survive. She was nice and somewhat level-headed and not a complete self-centered asshole.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and that is something that another complaint about a lot of found footage films, not all of them, but a lot of them are, the characters are douchebags and, things like that. And you do often find that that's the case. I mean, I would expand that to a lot of mainstream horror films in general, but
yeah,
yeah,
that's fair.
you see that with a special emphasis, I think, with found footage, and that can be true, but not always. I mean, the ones that I tend to like, they have characters that you are interested in, or some of the ones that I really love, the bad guys are the ones who actually are taking the video, or the fact that the characters are unlikable is part of the point.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
look, Cannibal Holocaust is a prime example of that.
well, that or even something that like Project X, which people hated, but like that, I felt like
Forced
a lot.
space.
Well, a lot of in that case, a lot of comedies that are not found footage, I think, have very kind of unlikable and even like morally reprehensible characters that
True.
get kind of touted as, oh, this is like you and your friends, but then that movie comes along and says, well, this is like, these characters, you just don't want to admit it because that you're seeing it in this really cold kind of objective reality here. And so, I mean, even though the characters can often be douchebags and these kinds of things, the fact that it is in that found footage style, it does give you that kind of that documentary style removed, so that way you can judge the characters for yourself, and you're not
Right.
the filmmakers aren't necessarily telling you that, oh, this is like you and this is like your friends, and it's like, well, no, thank you. I am who I am, and my friends are my friends, and don't speak for me, thank you.
Well, I would point out
Lily
too
was
that like
cool.
yeah, she was cool. She's arguably my favorite character if I had to pick one. TJ Miller made me laugh a few times, but he was pretty annoying. Cloverfield moves right along though. Even my kid commented on it. So while the characters are unlikable to certain extents,
Pacing
the movie's
is great.
packed full. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Pacing is great.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even Nami walked in like right as it all kicked off, and she stood and watched like probably 20 minutes of the movie with me actually, and she just said, "Man, this is a fast movie."
It's
From
very
the mouth
fast.
of babes, like
It's very
But-
fast once you finally get to once you finally start to see more of the monster. I mean,
It does ramble a bit at first.
my biggest problem with the film is not that I don't think the film was lazy. I have never thought that about it. I do think that the film had its moments of very good pacing, but I really think that we should have seen a little bit more of the monster a little bit earlier off, maybe.
I mean, I think that the fact that we didn't get to see it all that great, I mean, I think that it served what the movie was going for, because I mean, it's not like, say, Gareth Edwards' Godzilla, where you expect to see more of Godzilla than you necessarily got, or it looks like you're gonna get into like the big kaiju fight, and then all of a sudden they pull the camera way back, and you're like, oh, come on, But in this case, it's like, well, would you really be stopping to linger and get a really good shot of a monster, or would you be running the fuck away?
Yeah.
Well,
there's that element of like
It'd be like,
norm-
guys, I'm going home.
exactly.
I
That
think
reminds me.
there was even
It reminds me of that South Park episode that made fun of Cloverfield.
I mean, when those rats were going in one direction and they fucking stopped, I was like, why would you stop?
Yeah.
You see these rats going like in the other direction, and that means follow the rats.
That reminded me of what was that from? There's a scene that I feel like that reminded me immensely of a scene from another movie. Oh, well, for one thing, it's like the scene in Jurassic Park with the Gallimimus.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade when they're down in the sewers, and the Guardians of the Grail
Yeah.
or whatever. They try to smoke them out.
Right.
Yeah, I think that if you had seen the monster the whole time and you were just getting a constant view of them through like news reports, maybe
Yeah,
news reports, but if you were looking at the monster the whole time like a regular movie, I think that this movie would have come and gone and vanished. It would have,
Right.
yeah. No,
it's just another Godzilla 1998. Eh. And
could see that would
yeah.
kind of sort of work maybe as if there was
Right.
another monster that the Clover monster fought, but even then that would be a different movie, and it just
Yeah.
wouldn't
Right.
wouldn't be the same thing. And I mean, now generally speaking, with my kaiju films,
Mhm.
if we're talking like classical kaiju stuff, generally speaking, I tend to like there to be more than one monster. Because I mean that's why you watch it. You want to see monsters beat the shit out of each other. But in this case, like it's trying to go for something else. It's trying to go for what this could really be like, and
Right.
what it would feel like if you were to be there on the ground, in that environment and everything. And this looks like a recording that, you know, maybe it might have surfaced on the deep web at some point before being taken down, because normally it would have been confiscated or whatever, which I mean, certain sensitive footage that, was recorded by killers, or, is like crime scene photos or
Right.
crime scene videos or something, those tend to be suppressed. And so, it definitely gives off that feel.
Well, it definitely has that stamp on it at the beginning and the end of something like, what was it, like government property, do not duplicate, or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Like
Oh, yeah.
Department
But
of Homeland Security
I,
stuff, which I mean, and that's something that actually,
as
Paranormal
far,
Activity did kind of sort of, but in a
right,
not in like Homeland Security or FBI or anything like that. It wasn't like that, but they, said, Paramount Pictures wants to thank the cooperation of the
right,
Santa Clara Police Department and the family of whatever, so they're trying to do their best to give it that extra layer of authenticity. I think this one, you get more of the sense that this is something that, is, top secret, in something that, that
yeah,
only a few people in the world would be able to see in the movie's universe. And
top men.
exactly. Um,
I think that the glimpses that you did get of it, I mean, of course, you only got the real full glimpses through the news coverage and through their flight at the end, or at the very end of it. But whenever you would get a glimpse of it from even like a foot or something from the main characters, it conveyed the horror that the movie actually has. They weren't looking
Yeah.
like we would be from Godzilla. I mean, I'm sorry, but most Godzilla movies are not really horror-based movies. They're kind of sci-fi action type movies.
yeah. Well, they're basically like, the giant monster equivalents of like watching a WWE match or something.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
And
very
I think
much.
that's a worthy. I think that's a worthy comparison, because
right.
I mean, WWE. What's the whole point of it? You have these larger than life characters played by larger than most people on the planet humans, that are just beating the shit out of each other, and the problems that they're trying to solve are very like basic kind of, almost caveman like kind of disputes, but they're primal and they endure nonetheless. And so there's a reason why they satisfy that primal urge inside all of us, that underneath all of our civilized veneer, that we all have that. And so then you take that, you put in these kind of anthropomorphized reptilian, or mammalian or whatever they are, monsters, you blow them up, several stories high, and that's essentially that same kind of thing. So, it,
Almost more of a arthropodian with this one, I guess you might say.
and again,
Uh,
this is a little different, because you got one monster that's
Mhm.
not really humanoid. It's definitely animal. It's very, much operating out of the what we would call the reptilian brain, and it's not like it's planning anything, or not like it's trying to achieve some kind of goal other than surviving, and so it's a different kind of thing. Plus, it's more so about what would real people do in this
Yeah,
scenario.
it's not about the creature. It's about the people and their reaction to the situation that is caused by the creature.
And actually, I
And-
really. Sorry, go.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one thing I didn't get to say about initial reactions to this is I was not coming to the franchise blind, because I did go to theaters to see 10 Cloverfield Lane, which is a completely different movie in a lot of ways. But that's a movie you could say that's all about the way people have reacted to this whole thing. Because you got this dude living in a bunker who takes on a couple of essentially prisoners. And I mean, that one was all sorts of awesome for John Goodman's performance. I mean, that was one where the monsters didn't even factor in at all until the very end of the film.
Yeah.
It was like the monster was the dude right there in front of you.
Well, so for a little context there, so that 10 Cloverfield Lane, it originated as a spec script called The Cellar, and it, on a very, very basic level, it was just everything. I think it was everything up to the end where you find out that, oh wait, yes, there are actually aliens around.
Right.
I think it was everything up to that point was there, as far as a paranoid person keeping prisoners in his underground bunker and stuff. Like, that was the premise. And so then after Bad Robot Productions, after they bought that script, then J.J. Abrams had the idea of giving it some slight script tweaks and then being able to call it part of this Cloverfield franchise that was more so about a kind of vaguely defined, almost like anthology type franchise. Now that being said, I personally thought 10 Cloverfield Lane was a much, much stronger film, with a lot more just tension and overall acting, and just but you could say the sci-fi elements kind of tacked on, but even then it's like what's there is
though, because
it's
perfectly. It perfectly
like,
works to Jake's point, because it just fits, Like, totally, there would be crazy guys in bunkers and, using the situation to maybe live out some of their own messed up fantasies,
People in real life, they do that, where they will take a crisis and they'll use it as an excuse to do whatever, whatever kind of crazy thing that they want to do, they'll use it.
Oh, yeah, dude.
I wouldn't believe it.
Happens all the time. But yeah, and I've not seen the Cloverfield Paradox, but I did read in college, I did read the original spec script called The God Particle, and again, unrelated to Cloverfield at that time, but another spec script that was bought and tweaked and made part of the franchise. I've not seen the finished film.
Yeah, I still gotta.
But
I gotta get around to it. Still.
I did read the actual spec script back when it was a spec script, and it was all right. Like when I read it, it definitely needed some fleshing out and some reworking, but the basic premise to it was, you could see why it was bought. Like, it had a good nugget of an idea in there. But yeah, it seemed to me like 10 Cloverfield Lane had a better skeleton to work with, and then able to create this kind of sort of sequel to Cloverfield. But
yeah, that seemed to work better just based on people's reactions to that Paradox one. Like, that sounds like one that just mostly pissed everyone off that they tried to connect it.
I think the connection was much more of a stretch. 10 Cloverfield Lane did a much better job. I watched that movie, and I'll admit I zoned out in the middle of that one. But as far as 10 Cloverfield Lane, that's another good example of that premise. If you were to see the monster the whole time in 10 Cloverfield Lane, it would have made it an entirely different movie, and maybe even a lesser movie for seeing it.
Yeah,
very true.
Just for some clarity, also, I'm looking up the actual Clover monster. And the origins of this thing are only really explained in the viral marketing campaign. And again, that's pretty brilliant when you think about just how well the film was marketed. And
they did good.
it's even what was even genius, I think, about the marketing campaign was that the poster of the headless Statue of Liberty, in a way, it's kind of the inverse of Planet of the Apes, which is that's also kind of funny that Matt Reeves went on to do Dawn and War,
That is neat.
for that series. But yeah, it's kind of the inverse of Planet of the Apes, because there you had the Statue of Liberty head with no body, but then here you've got the body with no head. And so there's not a whole lot that we know about it, but basically it is an undersea creature, an amphibian creature, awakened by Tagruato submarines sent down from Chuea Station, and basically they awakened it. It's the same kind of Godzilla origin of this undersea dwelling creature that gets disturbed and goes on a rampage and that sort of thing. So yeah, very kind of basic origin there, but I think that you could definitely the whole thing is very deliberately ambiguous, and so like it could be extraterrestrial in origin, or you have no idea. But I think that's what's so neat about it, and the actual design of it for its time. I think it stands out. Like I don't think it's really much to write home about now, but I think at the time there wasn't a whole lot in movies anyway that looked like that. Maybe in video games, but even then, pretty impressive relative to its budget, I think, because it was not that big of a movie.
So and actually,
I like it.
That's another reason why it was a good idea, I'm sure, from their perspective, to minimize the amount of screen time that the monster actually had. Is because that was a whole lot less they had to spend on it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, I'm sure that what they did have to spend was kind of a pretty penny as far as trying to create the like a relative to the overall budget. I imagine most of it probably went towards trying to create that kind of street level type panic, and and that's no easy feat. And they do that extremely well.
Forrest.
Yes.
If there was anything else that you could say about this film from your first perspective of it, what would it be?
Let's see. Anything else I could say about it? Oh God, I can't. I'm just like
Not a problem. I just wanted to get a perspective from everyone, So
yeah.
Sometimes it's get an word edgewise. We're kind of like what do they call it? We're all like fighting for supremacy.
I mean, whenever you're in a discussion like this, part of it is jockeying for position, but also part of it is, if you do have things to talk about, then certainly say them, because otherwise, then it's not, because there have been plenty of times where it's like the movie didn't necessarily make a huge impression on me, so I haven't, had much to talk about, but. It is what it is. But I think certainly with this, I think that the film achieves what it sets out to do. The one thing that I would say is that a lot of people complain about found footage films in general that they give them motion sickness or whatever, and again, most of the complaints that people have about found footage as a technique, I think, are bullshit. The one exception to that in terms of the motion sickness, I will say, so I didn't even say when I saw this film for the first time, I realized, but it does tie in to this, because I did not see it in the theater, but I most certainly knew that people were talking about it, and the people that were talking about it, they generally were people that I didn't really like, and so I didn't really think about it too much. But then people were telling me, like in college, like, oh, you got to see it. And so I did. I think I rented it from the Media Resource Center and on DVD or something. So I watched it, and I enjoyed it. I wasn't quite as infatuated with found footage at the time as I am now. Um, and now generally, the whole oh, they give me motion sickness thing, that didn't really play a factor in most of the found footage films that I'd seen up to that point and what I would later see, with the one exception being that I will say that Cloverfield did make me feel a little queasy in certain spots, more so with the rooftops. And that's kind of weird to say because I remembered that I don't have vertigo or anything, but but in a way, it's like, well, you probably would want to throw up if you were jumping around, that high up,
Yeah.
so, and on the ground, just barely being able to run away from this thing. And, so I mean, out of all the found footage films to make you motion sick, that seems like a one that would do the job, like it would make sense. But
There's
I'm
probably
not
some truth to like, miss, like I could see how seeing it in the theater, Dave could miss bits of the because it's a chaotic movie,
Yeah.
It is.
Well, my problem was it's like if it's going to be a monster movie, at least show a little bit more to maybe why the creature decided to come up out of the.
I think
I
that's
understand
the
that.
expectation.
I understand the impulse to want to see that, but it would kind of destroy the whole thing they're going for with Cloverfield.
And you see, it's about how you watch it. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is if you're watching it from the perspective of this is the same to me as a Godzilla movie, this is going to be a terrible film to watch.
Yeah.
But you got to watch this as a found footage horror movie. Don't look at this as Godzilla. Look at this as Blair Witch. Look at this as Paranormal Activity. Look at this as these movies where you are not supposed to feel like this excitement for, as Dana put, WWE.
I didn't get that instruction booklet before I walked into the movie.
You didn't do the pre-reading?
No, I didn't do the pre-reading. I just walked into it kind of blindly, and it was like, well, where the fuck is the monster?
Yeah.
And then of course, the only times you do get to see the monster are when the army people are fighting it and shit. Okay, so you get a King Kong bridge attack, and then you get the whole pandemonium after that. Okay, one huge biting scene of the cameraman. So, but that's why I like watching the third movie, which tied it into the first movie.
It really tied the room together.
It really tied them together. The Cloverfield paradox. So.
I get like an example, like I think it was Dane that mentioned earlier the Godzilla film that we kind of skipped over in favor of our other film tonight. And I will admit to paraphrase or to paraphrase Dr. Ian Malcolm. I was watching it and going, you do intend to eventually have Godzilla in your Godzilla movie,
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot of it, and what you could see, you couldn't see because of the bad lighting. But that's the sort of movie where you go in with a definite expectation of, I'm going to see some Godzilla. Like, I think when you're getting away from those marquee ones, I wouldn't usually go in with my expectations as high on that, but I kind of see what you're saying. Like, if you looked at it as a kaiju film, I could see that being a potential downfall. And if you looked at it more as, like I think Brandon said, a found footage horror film, I would look at entirely the opposite. Like, I wouldn't be expecting more monster. I'd be expecting more screaming and panic and that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, I think what you said about expectations, like so much of film, either criticism or film perception or appreciation, however you want to say it, so much of that does come down to what does a person bring to it.
Right.
And, so if you go into something expecting it to be the best movie ever made and it isn't that, then you're going to be really disappointed.
Right.
It's almost never going to be that.
Exactly. I mean, and I think a lot of people's complaints about movies in general, 9 times out of 10, it comes down to having unrealistic expectations or unfair expectations, rather than just trying to ask yourself, okay, what is the movie trying to be, and appreciating it for that. And so
Right.
that's kind of, generally speaking, that's kind of where I try to. That's my technique for film criticism as much as I can make it. Again, it depends on what exactly it is. Like if it is Godzilla, then there's a certain degree of reasonable expectation that one can have just because of the brand name and the history and everything. But even then, you want to try to judge it on its own merits if you can. But still, I mean, I think it's more so like if something does have a brand name, then you can have a slight bit more in the realm of expectation relative to something that doesn't have a brand name. But speaking of brand names, so the actual name Cloverfield, it is the case citing, multiple sightings of a case designated as Cloverfield by the Department of Defense. So it's just the code name, I guess, that's been given to it. And Clover, it's kind of a weird name for a monster, and but again, I guess it's because it's sort of like a four-leaf clover in terms of its look, and also a four-leaf clover is supposed to be lucky, and this is not lucky for sure. And I mean, there are a lot of real life government projects or whatever that have really innocuous names, and they did it on purpose so that way, like Operation Northwoods or Paperclip, things like that.
Well, I read a couple of explanations for it that I think were pretty good. One is that there was the working title for the film, partly because it was that sort of innocuous thing, and I think they took it from a location that happened to be called Cloverfield, and then when they came back to it, they were like, why don't we just use that as the title?
Yeah, well, there are other working titles,
right.
Which one of these I like a lot, but the other one's really stupid. It has several working titles, including Slusho, Cheese, and Gray Shot. Now, Gray Shot's a cool name.
Yeah.
That almost sounds like a superhero movie when I'm thinking of like Deadshot or something, or Bloodshot.
Did you say Cheese was one of them?
Yes, Cheese.
Shit, they should have used that. That would have
been I'd watch the Cheese movie.
Coach Cheese.
They did that, it would have to be about a giant mouse.
Short for Coach Cheese.
I'm down. That hasn't been done yet, I don't think.
I don't think it has. Is there a giant mouse or a giant rat movie? Well, I know that there have been there's Willard and Ben, but I mean
not a movie. But didn't Ganchan have a Godzilla episode in The Adventures of Mini Goddess?
Yes, he did.
Yes.
That was when he took on all the mold and became like a giant molded rat.
But
I think a giant mouse that could have. Yeah. Oh, I got it.
Oh, so, it'd be Disney.
How could I forget? They do a kaiju rat in Class of Nuke 3, don't they, Dave?
Tromi, the nuclear rodent. Yeah. Well, but that would actually be a really amusing, like if you did a giant mouse and made it like a metaphor for Disney, something that was pulling up other things and growing bigger. It's like that would be kind of.
I think there's also a Japanese kaiju one called Nizula or something like that.
I don't.
It's not ringing a bell at a moment, but I may have seen it on a list somewhere.
I've got it.
The other thing I wanted to mention that I found very interesting, I don't know that this could be considered true. I do know enough about plants to know that they're probably not the only ones. But clover are reputed to be one of the first plants to colonize blighted habitats, like specifically radioactive habitats. So that could be a big part of the reason why that name was chosen, it certainly would make it more fitting.
Yeah, well, it would definitely fit thematically, plus the whole four-leaf clover being lucky and this is not lucky kind of thing.
Even if
So
that's
it's-
not true, that's a super cool coincidence.
It is. I mean, well, and also like when you hear the name Cloverfield, it's like if it weren't for the cool poster and everything that goes with it, and you just heard that title, it's almost like again super innocuous and not scary at all. But that's one of those things where having that eye-catching image and the feel of it and everything that really helps to transform what would otherwise be like a kind of eye roll, like that's not scary at all kind of title. Which we haven't mentioned Drew Goddard, who wrote the film.
Yes.
He had some history with being a writer for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Alias, and Lost. Of course, Alias and Lost are two J.J. Abrams shows that were that went on to have quite a lot of good viewership and praise and everything. And then he created the Netflix series Daredevil, obviously based on the Marvel Comics character. And then he co-wrote and directed Cabin in the Woods, and then directed, wrote
the El Royale.
Directed, wrote, and produced the Bad Times at the El Royale, and then the screenplays for this and World War Z, which I've not seen yet, and then then he wrote the script for The Martian. He adapted the novel The Martian into the movie, and got a Oscar nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay. So
damn, Drew, not screwing around.
I know.
He was at one point when Sony was going to do their Sinister Six spinoff prior to the deal with Disney. Which again, that this movie may or may not come into fruition in some form, we don't know. But he was originally attached to direct and write the Sinister Six film, which that would have been interesting. I don't really know how you could do a Sinister Six movie without Spider-Man, because they have no reason to exist outside of Spider-Man. But
I mean,
then
you
again,
could. It'd just be stupid.
well, you'd have to almost do it like a Suicide Squad thing, where you make them like anti-heroes, or you make them go up against some other thing or something. I don't know, but even so, it's just worthy to note his pedigree.
For sure.
Well, you also skipped with Reeves's pedigree. I think you skipped over mentioning that he adapted "Let Me In" for the American audience.
He did this.
Absolutely fantastic.
Well, that also showed, which I mean, I think he did one hell of a job as far as taking the found footage format and blowing it up many, many times over in terms of size and scale and spectacle and all that stuff. But also at a time before that technique would become really well known, and the studios were jumping on it because it was relatively inexpensive and profitable and everything. It seems to have kind of run its course in terms of the mainstream anyway. And you knew that it would, just because it's like any other technique, any other thing that it's going to have its time in the sun, and then it's not. Massive kudos to him for taking that technique, which really had not achieved full fruition yet, taking that and combining it with the largely stagnant, in the US anyway, largely stagnant kaiju genre, merging them together and making something that we still talk about today, whether we liked it or not or whatever. We still talk about it, we still remember it, and I think it's largely because it was very it stood out relative to its time, but it was also very, very effectively marketed. And I think that should not be discounted. A very effective marketing campaign can really cement something into the audience's brain that can outlast other movies that aren't as well marketed. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about Jaws in quite as we'd be talking about it, but it wouldn't be in quite as much of a a fond remembrance or whatever, had it not been for that iconic poster and for a theme and all that stuff.
I think an even better example would be Blair Witch, because again, I did not see that in theaters, but I started college right after it hit theaters, and I remember going on a hike. We were coming home just before dusk, and half the people there had seen the movie and were flipping the hell out.
Yeah. And that was kind of the polar opposite of this film in terms of scale and budget, and that was an indie film in the truest sense of the word, that blew up, in a very real way. It's very much like a little film that could kind of story, and even this, as far as like a mainstream Hollywood film, even this is not humongously budgeted, and it was kind of a relatively small film that could. So I mean, these kinds of things, they definitely had their place, and I do think it goes down to effective marketing, effective tension, effective blending of things, and something that we all remember. And I think it definitely stands out relative to other um, kaiju or other giant monster films, which I'm often a little conflicted about non-Japanese films being given the name of kaiju as opposed to just giant monster, just because of, like, I'm thinking of in the 50s there were a lot of like giant bug movies and things which were just all that they were the insects that we know in real life, just blown up many times in size, as opposed to original creatures and creatures with personalities and things like that. And this would, I think, be a little bit more comfortably in the realm of kaiju, for the simple reason that it's a unique creature with a different design. It's more, again, more in the line of like 1998 Godzilla in terms of the design and the Americanization of it.
See,
And
I don't. It looks a lot like Gorgo from Godzilla 2000. If you set them next to each other, you could see the similarities. So while I see that to a point,
you get my point, though.
Yeah, Gorgo's a little more anthropomorphic, like, or whatever, where he's bipedal. That's what.
And an original design, as opposed to just something like Them, where it's literally just ants that we know.
Those atomic age creature features joints. I think it's got to fit certain sensibilities to fit with kaiju. I mean, kaiju just means giant monster anyways, but it's like, definitely there's a flavor to it, and certain American movies have it and certain ones don't. I would say that the kaiju blood is flowing thick in the veins of Cloverfield. And it's very subtle the way they connect it to Japan, like that's where he's going to. That's why they're having the whole party. There's a scene in there,
and that's a good touch. That was the viral campaign having revealed the creature's origin. It's being somewhat connected to Japan. It's like it does seem to pay its sufficient homage, and so but again, that's why it's important to specify these things, because something that is literally just a giant ant, a giant mantis, and nothing else, a giant spider, with nothing else to really distinguish it, I don't think that belongs in the realm of kaiju, as opposed to an original monster with
freaks.
Oh, that's one we should talk about sometime.
Yeah.
But, you know what I mean. It's like that kind of belongs in its own category of, like, I call those kinds of movies like animal exploitation, because they're literally just animals that we know in the real world, just given some little thing to make them different, and off you go. You got your movie, as opposed to like an original creature with an original design that may be more anthropomorphized than others. In this case, this is much more of a creature that's trying to survive. It's not a guardian of the earth or anything.
It's just trying
piggyback rides through the sky and shit.
It's just woken up and mad as fuck, and it just destroys the shit out of.
It's like that. It's like that little comment Mo posted earlier. Like, I was having a good nap, and you woke me up. What?
Actually, one thing I wanted to say about the characters of it, because I kind of fell behind on that one. When we were talking about the characters and talking about they're kind of unlikable for the most part, I've noticed that, and this is one of the differences between the horror franchises and something like a kaiju franchise, is that in a horror franchise, you really have two types of characters that appear. Those characters that are annoying, that you are perfectly happy with them being killed off, and in some cases even might root for the monster. And this happens a lot in things like Friday the 13th is a good example. Or you have characters that you actually get a bond with, and part of the horror is you are scared for their lives because you want them to make it out. Like a lot of Stephen King books tend to do that, and there's a reason why they're so slow to start, because they're building the characters.
Yeah, I think
Have so much invested, you're afraid for them to die.
I think the only character in here that I would say that I would was somewhat, cared for was the cameraman, the one who eventually became the cameraman. Because it's his story that you kind of see. I mean, it starts out as the brother preparing for the brother's leave, but it becomes more of this shy young man who evidently has some feelings for this girl, so he just ends up at a party where she's at, and it goes from there. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you though, Brandon. I think that there are definitely movies where you care if the characters get out okay, and the ones where you're just kind of, you can't wait to see the annoying person die.
Right.
I think that's something that makes Scream stand out from Friday the 13th, because Friday the 13th is all about see Jason, kill someone in a particularly creative way. Like that's really what that series is about. Whereas I feel like with Scream, part of it is the meta humor, but I think, at least for me, what kept me coming back to it was that I really did like the characters. Well, I really like the characters, and the fact that enough of them get to live from sequel to sequel, that you get to see them grow and change as people. I'm like, that's really good. I like that.
Of course, in that one, you also have the hook of some of the characters you come to like getting offed in later episodes, and it just makes it that much more effective. Like I really liked Randy, and so I really hated seeing what happened with him. And even Cotton getting offed in the opening scenes of a later movie, just kind of because you'd spent time with them earlier. Even though Cotton was a little bit of a douche, he was still charismatic because Liev Schreiber.
Yeah,
that was the original Godzilla film in Gojira. We talked about it last week, where they set those people up on the train so you get to know them a little bit, so that when Godzilla bites into the train and kills them all, looking kind of silly at the time, but but still, you actually have an attachment to it.
And apparently they made a point in that movie of the vast majority, other than the first 2 or 3 ships that are attacked, they made a point of hitting people that you had been introduced to. Like, they made a point of that. Like, even the one guy who survived gets killed later. That sort of thing. And they made a point of doing that. And when we get to the other movie, which we should do very soon, I hope, they did a little bit of that in King of the Monsters. They did a little bit of that, the people you'd gotten introduced to earlier. Or we'll go ahead and just mention the Godzilla that came before that, the 2014. You get Juliette Binoche has star billing, and she gets offed in the opening 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you think Bryan Cranston will be the lead, and
he doesn't last very long either, which is too bad, because he was the best part of the movie.
Oh, he was great.
Well, but when is he not good, really?
Exactly.
Another kind of interesting parallel with OG Godzilla is the whole, how that kind of like spiritually parallels the atomic bomb or whatever, the hydrogen bomb getting dropped on him. And you could say something about that with this and like 9/11,
Definitely. Well, certainly in the way that it's the way that the footage is captured, the overall confusion, and the panic in the streets, and the fact that nobody knows anything. And it's, when 9/11 happened, again, there was a lot of confusion at the time, and then for quite a while, the exact details of what happened. Like it took quite a number of years for those things to come out, and then eventually it was all very piecemeal, and so that's what gave rise to the whole conspiracy theories about how it was an inside job, blah blah blah. But that was part of why they arose, because that information, it did come about piecemeal, and it took a long time to get all that information together. So in this case, it's like, well, and that's why something like the 9/11 Commission report was such a big deal, because it took such a long time to get together. But prior to that, any information that would have arisen would have been largely under lock and key at the time, just because they were trying to, try to track down Osama bin Laden, try to track down, the people that did this thing. So obviously they're trying to control the information. But, so you could definitely buy why the story was told this way.
Oh yeah, and I'd argue too that they do it a little more, like, definitely more subtle. Godzilla hits you right on the nose with that. This is clearly like supposed to be, a stand-in for atomic weapons. Like you see the fallout after Godzilla attacks. It's impossible not to think of like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But they also come right out and tell you that several times during the movie, that that's kind of what we're talking about. With Cloverfield, they don't ever mention 9/11 or anything. It was still too soon at the time, but it's like it's impossible to look at those images and not think of that.
Part of it, I think, was that, again, it is like you look at War of the Worlds, and that was 2005, and they kind of make more explicit allusions to it, or to the fears that a child would have of such a thing, and it being connected to terrorism. Whereas here, so this is early 2008, and so we're still within like 7 years, less than 7 years of the attacks, and so it's still relatively top of mind, but it's not brand spanking new in terms of the wounds of the country. So it's close enough, but it's not such that one would need to make an explicit reference to it.
It feels smarter to me that it's just subtle. Like you don't need to explain it.
If they did that, then I think it might have come across as either hokey or dated, or things like that.
Yep.
And they also were 3 years before. I seem to remember now, and I could be remembering this slightly wrong, but I seem to remember that one of the reasons why people were so affected by Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close was that was one of the first films that hit 9/11 head on. Like, it really did hit it head on, and that wasn't until 2011.
Yeah, that was that 10-year anniversary. I mean, you had ones that did it earlier, like you did United 93 and World Trade Center and stuff like that. They did exist, but like in terms of the kind of in a retrospective kind of the ways in which this event did affect people, I suppose you could definitely say that. I know you're
right, because I remember World Trade Center kind of did not get the love they were hoping for.
Yeah, and it's too bad, because I mean it was a solid movie. Like, it wasn't Oliver Stone's best, but it was it was solid. It was what it was. But we should definitely start to wrap up. If anyone does anyone have favorite moments of the film?
Oh, there's a few. Definitely, I enjoy the scene with T.J. Miller's character and that rando friend that got bit. The way that whole sequence played out, with them actually finally not seeming totally creeped out by him. That was pretty cute. And then she immediately has her head explode, which is always gonna get an upvote from me.
Exploding heads are the best.
What's that, Forrest?
The exploding heads are the best.
Yeah, I mean, just throw them in there. I don't even care if it fits the context. Just blow people's heads up.
Scanners crossed with Godzilla.
Or what was it, My Deadly Neighbor? Christy Swanson decapitates Ma Fratelli with a basketball.
Yes, that's such a great scene, dude.
Put in the middle of 4 weddings and a funeral, and the funeral involves someone whose head blew up.
Oh man, we need to deep fake a bunch of movies with just random exploding heads, like especially ones where they don't fit.
Experiment.
Halloween 6.
My best friend's wedding.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about,
Just
dude.
see,
Steel
see?
Magnolias.
Someone
Let's
needs
just
to create Philip's vision.
The
Oh
note,
man.
the notebook
But
with exploding heads.
yes, all about it. Let's do it. Hey, fucking. If I had to pick a more subtle favorite moment, that's not necessarily like a big deal, but it's something another little like element of that Japanese connection that I thought was neat. There's a brief moment where I forget the main dude's name, but like the guy that's going dragging them all to their death, trying to get to his girlfriend's house. He's arguing with this Japanese fella about which bridge to take, and the Japanese guy's trying to tell him like, "Oh, you go over to this one; it's probably safer." And he's like, "You know how far that is?" And then they end up going the wrong way to the bridge that gets smoked. And I just think that's cool because it's sort of a subtle way of saying like they probably should have listened to that Japanese dude. He might have done this a few times, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They've had experience doing this stuff.
Which other ones, other kaiju films, especially ones made in America, they have kind of alluded to that same idea, even if it's just kind of in a spiritual kind of sense rather than literally. But any other favorite moments?
I
That's
actually
it for
liked.
me.
I liked when they were at the beginning when they were just getting through the attack right before he starts he starts trying to get super obsessed with I need to do this because I think I might be able to get laid tonight, that sort of thing. The part where they're sitting there at the electronics store and you're seeing people beginning to loot, and those people taking the widescreen TVs, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, it's amazing that you still get people looting and taking these TVs, even though that they know that this is basically they're all screwed. It's funny in that sense.
Keep in mind that this was when we talked about 9/11. This was only 3 years or less than 3 years after Katrina, which of course Hurricane Katrina, there were a lot of lootings and things, just general chaos and stuff, and you get lootings of all kinds of things in the wake of a lot of the protests that we've seen in the subsequent decade and the beginning of this one. So you definitely see in real life, you see examples of lootings in situations where maybe it's not the most opportune time.
Hey, I'll tell you right now, Kaiju attacks this bitch in the next couple of years, I'm getting that PS5. I don't care.
Even if you don't have any electricity to run it.
I don't even care, dude. I'll sleep with it like a pillow until I can.
And then going in an underground bunker, right?
Yeah, make those bunker days a lot better.
Yeah, you and John Goodman can play to your heart's content.
Playing FIFA down there.
Yeah, something like that.
Though, he ain't gonna play fair.
Nah.
But
he would only play like first-person shooters, I bet.
If I had to,
go ahead.
I was gonna say if I had to pick a favorite moment, because there's a few moments I enjoy, but if I had to pick a single moment, I might pick the moment where they're all kind of milling about half in and out of the buildings, and all of a sudden you see the Statue of Liberty's head just come flying into the scene. And it's like, well, someone is pissed. Something's going on that ain't supposed to be going on here.
It's like all sliced up after that,
Yeah.
Like people are freaking out, but no one can even really think of anything to say about that. That's not something you ever.
What do you say to something like that?
Well,
I don't think you say anything. You just pan the camera to it and stare for a moment. And just
well, I mean, that's what happened with. That's what happened with the World Trade Center. That it was such an icon of the New York City skyline that, and obviously the whole process of it wasn't as sudden as all of a sudden, here comes the Statue of Liberty's head. It wasn't quite that fast. It was still very, very fast relative to human perception. But, people afterward would tell you that it was so, the human brain is not evolved to comprehend when you see something that massive in the sky every day and then all of a sudden it's gone. It's like that fucks with your brain like you wouldn't believe. And that was a very common thing that people said.
And you could say about that scene, that was very much the monster throwing down the gauntlet and saying, y'all screwed.
In a way, it was kind of the Independence Day blowing up the White House of that decade.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it had that much significance, and people remembered it.
I guess one of my favorite scenes is in the video store where all of a sudden the news reports are starting to happen, and that's when you start to actually see a monster. At least the monster's tail and whatnot, and everybody's who's grabbed shit just all of a sudden just stands there still for a moment with their jaws dropped and shit. It is like, yeah, fuckers, you're fucked.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great enhancement to the comedy of the scene, like Brandon was pointing out. And then, like, you see, like, oh shit, even the looters are realizing that this isn't your normal situation.
No, it is not. Did Forrest say your favorite moment?
Favorite moment? Well, I can't go wrong with I don't know, with the Statue of Liberty, with the Statue of Liberty in the middle of the street, whether it's Cloverfield or Escape from New York, or if it's just buried in the sand like Planet of the Apes,
or in water like Deep Impact. So
yep.
I don't want to think about in water.
Well, technically, it would have been underwater in Waterworld.
True.
I think my favorite moment would be I liked it when things were relatively smaller scale, when they're underground and when they got the little parasites, and when you have that really icky, like, spraying blood on the plastic tarp, things like that. I just
or
like
the claustrophobic feeling of them being in the subway with all the rats.
that too, but I think it's just I like the idea of you got this really humongous creature, but then you've got all these smaller things that, if anything, could be a little bit more of a more pernicious threat when you think about it. Just like a large monster obviously is going to cause more destruction in terms of, like, in one fell swoop, but in terms of something that could be a little bit more pervasively threatening because it can get into smaller spaces and stuff. I think the little parasites and something that could kill you from the inside out. I think that would, for me, that usually kind of gives me the willies a little bit more. Just because obviously parasites exist in real life, and that
they are grody. I will say those things sounded adorable, though. I like the whole sound that they made.
Exactly. Did you say your favorite, Mo?
I did. I think maybe
so.
Brandon might be the one that.
Yeah.
Brandon and possibly.
I think he did.
Yeah, I did. I was in the looting scene.
That's right.
Oh,
yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Well, yours and Dave's kind of played together a little bit, which was cool.
Did we talk about the music at all?
Was there any score?
There was really no music until the very end. Well, the party music.
Yeah.
And then there was, at the very end, they had an original piece that played over the second half of the credits.
Yeah.
And
but there wasn't any non-diegetic music in the film, as I recall. Meaning no, score or anything.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, you had the party music, that sort of thing. But I mean, a film like this, it's not really. If it were to have a great score, I think that would defeat the purpose.
It would remove you from it a bit.
I think that piece they had at the end, though, was a really great way to go out.
Oh, and the first part of the credits being just dead was like cool after the end of the movie too.
Yeah.
In terms of technical stuff, we definitely can't not mention that part where they're in the skyscraper and they're trying to pull that chick off the rebar, and she sets the camera down and it slides forward up against that rock to, like, because clearly they probably weren't in an angled set. I think they did that to just reinforce that the shit's leaning to one side, But I just thought that was a super cool, subtle. They didn't have to do that. They did that for us.
Well, despite it only being a $25 million film, it really looks and feels a lot bigger than it really is.
Yeah.
Well, and that's just smart. That's just smart allocation of your budget right there.
Right.
Another little cool subtle thing about it, if it's true, I don't know. It was just in the description that I read, but it's exactly the length of a DV tape.
Right, I heard that too.
Well, and that's why you have the little bits of the previous footage that they're recording over that get spliced in there intermittently, because that's having shot on DV tapes. I know that can happen if something goes wrong, or you know. And DV tapes suck, let me tell you. I much prefer you know, good old proper digital, you know, with hard drives and stuff. But anything else before we do our little outros?
The only thing I want to say is a small gripe. It does relate to the production aspect. And that is, like I said before, giving the camera to that one dude really did make most of the film work. But once he gets offed at the end, it is not entirely logical that the two survivors would pick up the camera at that point. So there is that slight suspension of disbelief, especially since that one dude has been tunnel focused on getting back with his girlfriend. Funk everything else. That is all he cares about. Why would he pick up the camera?
Well,
so
yeah.
there is that. It
had some of their Coney Island footage on it. He had to save.
Yeah, I guess.
Maybe some other stuff too. I don't know, but
yeah.
I took it more as
that he taped over.
because there's that scene right before they're obviously screwed at the end,
Yeah.
where he finally does take the idea of like recording last words seriously. So I think maybe it was
you know,
that, him thinking that. You know?
Yeah, like some kind of lingering thing in the back of your mind to. I mean, that there are far more contrived reasons for why people keep recording in these kinds of films than and that's another complaint that people have about found footage, that in certain films, I will say it is warranted as far as you know, why they are recording in the first place and why they would keep recording, but in the ones that I like, they generally there's a good reason why they're recording and why they keep recording. But yeah, in this case, I could definitely see that as being, you know, just like this need to have some kind of documentation of this completely unforeseen event in human history.
Yeah. And like I said, it's a minor gripe, but it's not like there could have been much more. It could have felt much more contrived than it did.
Yeah.
It could. Yeah.
Could have been like Diary of the Dead, you know.
You're right.
Alrighty.
All right.
So, do we want to do our outros, or do we want to save it for the next one?
I'll say go ahead and do the next one, because we're already at 11.
The only thing I do want to put out is just as I try to shout out these people, just again shouting out the people who voted and would make this possible and amazing collections: Incorporated, Movie Collectors, Moe's Taverns, Talk Movies with Us. Look them up on Facebook. Give them your love. Is everybody coming over to the next one? If there's anybody who's not, they need to.
I'll be there, baby.
Are you coming with us this time, Forrest? Or are you retiring after?
I think it's stick around for the next one.
Okay. Then,
hell yeah.
Then we're pretty much done, I guess.
Alrighty.
All right.
Well, we'll see you in the next episode, and let us know what you thought.
Stay out of your friends' loves lives, kids. That's how you get killed by kaijus.
Yeah.
I'll just set up the next link in Skype here, and then I'll just upload these afterwards and whatnot. So,
okay.
But